we continue our analysis of the US-Iran war. And in this war, there are three major questions that will determine the outcome of this war, as well as the world afterwards. Okay, and these three questions are, number one, will the US launch a ground invasion? So right now, the United States and Israel are primarily focused on an air war, striking Iran from a distance. In the past, we would call this siege warfare. And as long as it remains an air war, the United States can choose to de-escalate and withdraw from the Middle East. They would lose this war, but the loss would not be catastrophic. Whereas if they choose to launch a ground invasion, it would escalate very quickly, and they would be trapped in Iran for the next 5 to 10 years. It would be a catastrophe whether or not they win or lose. Because in order to fight a ground war, the United States would have to institute a national draft where young men as young as 18 would be forced to join the army and be sent to fight in Iran. Okay? So that's the first big question for us. Will the United States send in ground troops? Remember, there's the idea of mission creep, where maybe in the beginning you're like, I'll send 1,000 troops to do a small mission. But then it doesn't go well, so you send in 2,000, okay? It slowly creeps up. It's what we call mission creep. And that's how the United States embroiled itself in Vietnam. All right, so that's the first big question. Second big question is, will nukes be used? There's a lot of concern online that Israel is preparing a nuclear strike on Iran because the Israelis don't like how the war is going, and they want to reclaim the initiative. Nukes are a taboo in geopolitics. The Americans used them at the end of World War II, and no one's used them ever since. If Israel were to use tactical nuclear weapons, they would break this universal taboo, and we might find ourselves in a nuclear apocalypse, okay? So that's a great concern that everyone has right now. And the third question is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the third holiest site in the Islamic world. There's Mecca, there's Medina, and there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Muslims believe that it is from the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem where Muhammad ascended to heaven. And the Jews believe that the Al-Aqsa Mosque sits on the site of their temple, which is the house of God. So religious Jews, extremists, want to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque to rebuild the third temple. And if the religious Jews, the extremists, destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, then the 2 billion Muslims in this world would be religiously obligated to go to war against Israel. Okay? So these are the three big questions that will determine how this war will determine the future of the world. Okay. So in this class, I teach you game theory to make predictions about the future. So right now, I'm going to make 3 predictions. And then I will show you my analysis as to how I make these predictions, okay? Now, what's important to understand is that these are only my guesses based on my analysis. And whether or not they turn out to be correct will determine the validity of my analysis. I don't have inside information. I don't know more than you do, okay? I'm just working out of public knowledge and doing game theory analysis. So according to game theory, this is yes. The United States will send in ground troops. According to game theory, this is no. And number 3 is yes. Okay? So what I'm going to do is spend the next 2 classes explaining to you my game theory analysis as to how I come to these conclusions. And we can watch how world events unfold. Now, I want you to understand something, which is that for my theory to be valid, for my analysis to be valid, I have to be correct on all three. Okay? If I miss one, then all my theory is wrong. I know there's a lot of concern from around the world that nukes will be used. And I am 100% confident that nukes will not be used at this time in this war. And if I'm wrong, I apologize to the world, okay? But at the same time, we'll all be dead anyway, so it doesn't really matter, all right? Okay, all right. So let me explain my analysis, okay? So remember, today, what I'm going to do is do number 1 and number 2, explain to you why Israel will not use nuclear weapons and why there will be a ground invasion. And then next class, I'll explain number 3 to you, okay? That's a plan for this week. All right, so to understand what's going on, I need to teach some basic geopolitical theory, okay? So in military affairs, in geopolitics, there's a concept called escalation ladder. Escalation ladder. Okay? And the dominant theory is that whoever has escalation dominance has the most advantage. Okay, so what this means is, let's just say you and I get in a fight, okay? I have a knife, you have a gun. Well, a gun is more dominant than a knife. Therefore, you have a greater advantage over me, and therefore you should win, in theory, okay? And applied to this war in the Middle East, Israel and the United States have escalation dominance because they have nuclear weapons, and Iran doesn't. Therefore, the United States and Israel have a huge advantage over Iran, okay? But what I will show you today is that this theory is incorrect. It actually doesn't work that way, right? So let's start off with a very simple example. Let's just say that two people get into a fight, okay? A and B. And how the escalation ladder will work is that maybe A and B run into each other, okay? And then A says, hey man, say sorry. And then B's like, it's not my fault. You say sorry, okay? So there's a conflict. And it's usually a very small conflict. No one knows why, and no one knows who's at fault, okay? So they start cursing each other, okay? So the first step is a conflict. Second step is they start cursing each other, right? Screw you, screw you. And then they might start pushing each other, right? Push, push. And then they hit each other, okay? Punch, punch. And then they start the fight. And then one pulls out a knife and the other pulls out a gun. All right? And then B shoots dead A. Fight over, right? Okay. So there are certain things that we need to keep in mind about this example. First of all, the fight is not contained in itself, okay? You cannot perceive this game as just one between A and B, who's physically stronger. There are other players involved as well. Okay, so for example, there are spectators or friends. There's a crowd watching you, okay? This is important because there's also the police, right? Eventually the police will come, the government, and they'll ask people, hey, what happened, man? Whose fault was it, right? And also, for people who are religious, there's also God, right? If you die, you have to go up to God, heaven, and God's gonna ask you, hey man, how did you die? So you have to explain how you died, all right? So in other words, in this escalation ladder, there's 3 factors that you have to consider that drive people up this escalation ladder. These 3 factors are, of course, emotions. Second is power. And the third is reason or logic. Okay? And what drives people up is adrenaline. In other words, it is impossible to skip the escalation ladder, right? You don't go from like, hey, screw you, to like the guy pulling out a gun and shooting you, okay? You have to go up step by step by step because adrenaline is rushing in your system. And this adrenaline, it's making you more angry, but it's also making you stronger and more resolved. And it's also telling you how to fight this battle, okay? And the thing to remember about this is really important, is that it's not about how fast you climb up the escalation ladder, okay? If you get too angry and you overreact, then you are at fault, right? What you want to do is climb it up strategically. And that means you have to remain calm and controlled. Because if you remain calm and controlled, you have 3 advantages over your opponent. The first is focus. Second is clarity. And the third is focus. You're clear and resolve. Okay, sorry, resolve. Okay, what this means is that you know what you're doing, you have a strategy, you're clear about how to achieve your strategy and your goal, and you are determined to achieve it, okay? But in order to have all 3, you have to remain calm, and therefore you need to control yourself as you climb up this escalation ladder. Because remember, it's just not about being your opponent, it's about justifying yourself to your friends, to the police, and to God as well. Because you might hit that person, he might go to the hospital, and you've won the fight, but then you go to prison for 10 years, in which case you've lost the fight. Okay? All right? So the main idea I want you to remember is this, and this is the law of escalation. And this is a very important idea in my game theory model. Control is more important than dominance. Okay? Control is more important than dominance. Why? Because control is the idea of calibration. Calibration means that you time or you structure or you strategize your response in a way that helps you achieve your strategic objective. Okay, you're not just throwing punches, you're throwing a punch in a certain way that allows you to defend yourself, that strikes fear in the opponent, and also allows you to seem as the good guy among spectators. Okay, and then when the police come, you can justify why you threw that punch in a certain way to the police so that you don't go to jail. Okay? All right, so another way of saying this is that calibration is ultimately about strategic flexibility. And the idea of strategic flexibility is, in a fight, the person who has the most options, the person who has the most flexible strategy will usually win the fight. Okay? This is a law of escalation, and I'll explain to you how this applies to the US-Iran war. Okay? All right. So before I actually talk about the war, what I want to do is do a thought experiment to examine how we can understand what's going on between the United States and Iran. Okay? So let's do a thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this. Let's just say that there's a bully. Okay? And he's the biggest guy in the school. And he has a gang. Okay, these are his friends. And there's like maybe 4 of them. And so what they do is they basically prey on everyone at the school, okay? And there's maybe 100 people at the school, right? And so what they do is they make everyone in the cafeteria pay a tax. Okay, if you want to go in the cafeteria and eat, you have to pay a tax. Maybe $1, who knows, okay? And the friends of the bully go collect the tax and then give him all the money, okay? And that is the structure of the school, where if you want to eat lunch in the cafeteria, you have to pay a tax, and the bully's friends collect the money, and the bully shares the money amongst his gang, okay? Now, at first, people are okay with this system because they think that it's actually beneficial because the bully is keeping the peace and order in the cafeteria, right? He's keeping everyone safe. So yeah, I pay $1, but it's not that much money. And we're all safe so that we can all enjoy our lunch in peace in the cafeteria, okay? But then what happens over time is that the bully gets more and more arrogant because he feels invincible. Everyone just obeys him. So he develops the idea of hubris. And the idea of hubris is that no one has the courage to challenge me. Everyone's afraid of me, and therefore I can do whatever I want. So what does he do? Well, the first thing he does is that he charges more money from everyone, okay? So the tax goes up, and so people are disgruntled about this. Okay, they don't understand why they're paying more to the bully, okay? But not only that, but what he will also do is pay less money to his friends so that he can have more money because he wants to buy a car or he wants to go to Paris for the summer, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so everyone's not happy about this, but this is the reality that they live in, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so people just put up with it. One day, a new kid comes into the school, okay? The new kid. And he doesn't really understand the rules of the game. He goes to the cafeteria, and he doesn't know he's supposed to pay a tax. Right? So the bully's friend comes over and says, hey man, where's $1? And he's like, what dollar? I just got here. And he refuses to pay. And so what they decide to do is teach him a lesson by ostracizing him, by making him sit alone by himself in the cafeteria. Okay, you have no friends because you don't know the rules and you refuse to play along. And the new kid is like, I don't care. I'm happy not having any friends.